Hi, this is Nick Dawson, the editor-in-chief of Talkhouse Film, and you're listening to the Talkhouse Film Podcast. With films such as The Delta, 40 Shades of Blue, and Keep the Lights On, Ira Sachs has established himself as one of the most important voices in contemporary American independent cinema, and there's arguably no filmmaker who better portrays the complexities and subtleties of human relationships. That particular strength is once again at the fore in his latest film, Love is Strange, the poignant and funny tale of two men, Ben and George, beautifully played by John Lithgow and Alfred Molina respectively, whose lives change for worse rather than for better when they finally marry after being together for 39 years. Stacie Passon, who made a big impression with her 2013 Sundance hit Concussion, became friends with Sachs a few years ago and was the perfect person to chat with, as she calls him, the hardest working man in queer show business.
Hi.
Hi. How are you? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You're in New Jersey and I'm in Minneapolis.
You had to rub it in that I was in New Jersey, didn't you?
I had to be specific. Let's put it that way.
What do you have against New Jersey? Is it the same thing that you have against Poughkeepsie?
I'm just saying we're representing bits of America, like this film.
We all know that you like being in New York, don't you, Ira? I mean, it's a fact. You like your New York.
I like my life in New York. Yes.
You do. Yes, you do. But you're in Minneapolis right now doing press for your new fantastic film, Love is Strange. And I won't ruin it for anybody, but when you asked John Lithgow to do Full Frontal, did he say yes immediately for you, or because it was you, or?
Yeah, we're very close. No, I actually at one point did ask Alfred Molina to take his shirt off, and he said no. And that was the one time he ever said no to me in the making of the movie. That's interesting that you say that, only because people on this tour have been asking me about, the film is called Love is Strange, but it's certainly not a film about sex. And there's almost an absence of sex in the film. And so I've been thinking about representation and older relationships, and there were conscious choices really at some point to not make that what the relationship was about. Does that mean that they don't have sex? I don't know.
Well, I mean, at some point he does say something really beautiful, and it sort of changes the nature of the sexual. It talks about how the nature of the sexual relationship changes over time. He invites him down in a bunk bed. I don't want to give it away, but he says, "I miss your body next to mine," and that's a very sweet reference. Of just a close, intimate nature. He needs his body next to his, and I thought there were a lot of body touching kind of things going on. And I didn't think it's very interesting because this had the potential to have some goody two shoes sort of elements to it, but there was every time it sort of went into that sort of, oh, we're 70 or we don't do that kind of stuff anymore. They weren't goody two shoes. They were two, as they said, motherfuckers, at some point. You know what I mean? Which I really appreciated because they were whole fleshed out characters.
I've really taken to the term motherfucker as I've gotten older, and I'm always drawn to using it. And now I have 2-year-old kids, and I'm always telling my husband Boris not to use curse words, and he's always trying, but he's not very good at not using curse words. And the truth is, the one case of motherfucker that is in the movie, that John says the word motherfucker, by law or whatever, MPAA got this film an R rating just for saying motherfucker alone. That's what did it.
That's a drag. But you know what? I like the fact that I take that back. I like the film that it has an R rating, and the reason why is because it reminds me of the types of films that I grew up with. The film gave me this very lovely feeling. It gave me this feeling of sort of sneaking into Afro's drugs in Michigan in the 80s to buy the art section of the New York Times, to read about all the great performances. And it reminded me of all those great performances of New York performances of yore, and those R movies, that we don't get to see anymore. And I think that they reminded me for two reasons. One, directors tend to cover up those performances with a lot of tricks instead of sort of letting them happen. And then and actors just don't do them anymore. Or they haven't learned to do them anymore. And in this case, you have a director who's learned to be patient and doesn't want to cover up. And then you have the great Alfred Molina and John Lithgow, who will give you these wonderful performances if you just let them.
Yeah.
You know, and you must have been just in heaven on set. What was that process like?
Well, thank you for that, and those are the movies in a lot of ways that I'm still in conversation with. Very realist American films, also films. I've been in a 20-year obsession with the French filmmaker Maurice Pialat. And on set, when we were shooting, Christos Voudouris and I, the cinematographer, would like hold A Nos Amours and Lulu, these extremely naturalistic movies with movie stars, you know, Gerard Depardieu and Isabelle Huppert are in those films, and just seeing the kind of freedom of the performances and how the camera helped to capture those was something that we were very engaged in Love is Strange. I have developed a pretty specific way of working with actors, and that's whether they're seasoned actors like Lithgow Molina and Marissa Tomei, or younger actors like the kid Charlie Tahan, who's in the film and I think gives such a beautiful performance. And that is something that I've developed over, you know, having made 5 features, and that I don't rehearse the actors before we start shooting. We do talk individually. I spend time with each of them separately for, you know, 4 or 5 hours here or there, but I've never heard the script, and neither have they. We've never discussed anything looking or like subtext or motivation. Those are terrible words to me on a set to hear, because they limit the possibility of any one moment. What I do is I block the scene when I get there, when the day of the shooting, and ultimately when you shoot a scene for 4 or 5 hours, there's a lot of rehearsal, there's a lot of development, there's a lot of adjustments, and that's really where it comes to life. What I don't want actors to do, and this has worked well for me, is to have too much pre-thought before they actually respond to the other actor who's talking to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. But I'm wondering, so you've never heard the script before? You must have auditioned these actors. I mean, not Molina and Lithgow, but Charlie.
The smaller day players have done a scene for me, and I need to really see in that audition that they can do everything I want if we were going to make the movie the next day. I never assume anyone can transform through the process of me working with them. I really have to know that I can get what I want instantly. That's why for me, a non-actor and a non-professional actor and a experienced actor are kind of the same. They're both either right for the words or they're not. And I don't assume that any process is going to change that. So yes, I've heard, you know, one scene from an actor if they've auditioned for the film, but no other scenes, and never with the other actors that are in the movie.
And are you improvising as well, or is that just all part of it?
Well, John Lithgow has been making fun of me on this tour, and as we've talked about the film, because I want everything to be very loose, but I want them to get all the words right. So I'm not, and that's not because it's usually not because I'm a stickler for the words and think that they're brilliant or anything. I often think when actors flub words, they're actually looking for the words that I wrote and they just haven't quite found them. So often or they're going to say too many things when less will do. So I am pretty strict with the script. What is, I think, the real challenge for actors in my movie is that they simultaneously need to learn the business of the actions, what they're going to do with their hands and how they're going to cross and what they're going to do with the props. And all of that takes some time. And that's usually why for some actors, I know I won't get them to the right moment until about take 5 or 6. Other actors, Molina's in the lower range. Like he really gets going around 1 and 2 and 3. You know, Marissa, she's pushing in this wonderful way. She's super ambitious emotionally. So she's going to keep going until she gets to something that's really, really real and rich. And that's a different pace. You know, so each actor has their own needs. I don't really think of independent film. I think that I think about it as a way of being. I don't necessarily think of it as a genre, particularly if I'm thinking of my own work within the context of 100 years of movie making, which I think I am in conversation with myself. I mean, trying to kind of, and I'm not sure independent stands out as better or worse. I mean, I think right now, we can talk about economics, what I think is a real challenge and what I'm finding finally a way to do is to create a sustained career making a film after another film and to keep going. And I think that is what is really hard. Part of what has been useful for me is to not assume anyone else is going to give me the permission to do that. And I think that is when I go back to independent film in the terms of like John Cassavetes, who wasn't given, no one told him he could make those movies. He raised the money and made the movies because he had to, and they were not within a system. And I think that's part of what makes them really exciting. And I keep finding as a filmmaker, you have to go back to kind of your youthful attempt to be risky and also to be kind of radical in terms of how you're going to approach content, but even also about economics.
Talk a little bit about the imagery in the film. It seems like every image is painted.
A big difference in this film than in my previous films, and this came out of lots of discussions with Christos, the cinematographer, about how we were going to shoot this movie, is we're really working with a different lens than I'd ever done before. I think all my previous films were somewhat about an individual coming to know themselves, but in the process, they're experiencing a lot of alienation. And as such, I was often working with a long lens, where you see people in their landscapes and somewhat from a distance. Mm-hmm. With this film, I'm primarily working with the 50 millimeter lens, which is considered the lens of the human eye. And we're much closer, and we're much more frontal, which I've never been comfortable doing. And I think that creates a different kind of attachment for the audience that has created a different kind of response. So there's, each shot is an aesthetic question and asks, I take the shot very significantly. When I work with students, I teach at NYU, and I have them make movies in 5 to 7 shots because I want them to consider what each of those shots can do. And I think I try to put the same boundaries on my own work.
Did you make this movie in 5 to 7 shots? Is that what you're saying?
Just saying that each shot has to have aesthetic integrity and value, to be, and you have to really consider each image. It's not just a process of illustrating dialogue. It's about creating a series of images that work with continuity to tell the story. So I'm just saying that when you say each frame is a painting, to me, I guess I would say each frame is a shot, and I've considered that shot carefully while also trying not to be rigid. That's also as important, to have a looseness, which I think for me has maybe developed more as I've gotten older and I've felt a little more confident. And, 2 elements that I see in John Lithgow and in Ben that I'm really thinking about a lot lately is humility and confidence. The combination of those two is something to aspire for.
The other thing that I adored about it, and I've only seen 3 of your films, if you count Last Address, which I'm going to get into next. But knowing you for a little bit, as I have, I always love it when you can see sort of the director's hand over the work, his personality or her personality, and it just was pure you. It just seemed like it was you in that film. And that's always a real pleasure to be able to see. I mean, you don't even have to know the director to know it's the director. You could watch Mazursky's film and know that it was Mazursky, to understand the personality of the director. It's the humanness coming out of, it's the humanity, it's the maturity, the humility, the confidence coming out of the director. And that's pure joy to watch. And that's because that's assurance as well. So that was terrific. I want to use this this time to sort of segue into Last Address, which I think we talked about New York and how New York is a big deal in at least your last two films,
Right?
and what I consider, as much as I was blubbering with Love is Strange, Last Address is, I don't know, not much as a film really as a quiet eulogy, a perfect short film really. And Love Letter to New York and the great artistic potential we've lost, I think, as a city. Can you tell us a little bit about Last Address and why you made it? Because I want to go into all things queer for a second.
It was a turning point for me to make this film. In 2010, I'd been working for about 3 years to try to get a film funded, which was not getting funded within this independent system. And I was teaching, and I made a short film because I was telling my students to make short films that were at the top level of what they might be able to do. And I felt like I wanted to do that. I wanted to take the resources I had and make something as good as I could. And I made a film called Last Address, which is a picture, a series of images of the last residential addresses, the homes, the buildings where a group of New York artists lived when they died of AIDS. So these were a series of exterior shots that are both speaking to the past, because there is this absence of the people who live there, and also the present, because the films really bring the city at that moment when I was shooting to life. And it was a turning point, partially because I felt like I took the reins back in my own hands, and that was partially where I got the kind of drive to keep the lights on. I thought, I'm going to make this film without all those people I've been looking for to give me money and permission from other places. The other thing was getting familiar with this group of artists, people like David Wojnarowicz and Jack Smith and Jim Lyons, an editor who had actually also been my boyfriend in some years, who did a lot of Todd Haynes' films, and so many people that we lost to AIDS, and what I gained was access to who they were, because I started reading about a lot of people. And what I remembered was New York in the 80s, when I arrived there, when there was a different attitude about what it meant to be an artist and what we had as expectations. And we were not trying to be, it was less assimilationist. We were not trying to become a part of this major economic culture. We were still, the residuals of the punk era. And I was really inspired by those people who never thought they'd get really famous or make a ton of money, but made incredibly potent work. And it changed my life in lots of ways. It turned me around in terms of where I considered myself and positioning myself. And from that, I really made Keep the Lights On. I raised the money to make that film.
One of the things that's really, when I watch it, is the loss that we felt in terms of the great artistry that was lost and needs to be in many ways replaced and refined, and the community that was lost as well. And to your great credit, you are trying to in many ways recultivate that community, and it's one of the reasons why you have become such a hero to all of us, with the Queer Art Mentorship Program that you run out of New York City, and also I believe it's in LA, right?
So I run one series called Queer Art Film, and it's been going on for almost 5 years. And we invite an artist, a queer artist, to pick a film that they love and share it with an audience. And it's really become a kind of community organizing event. Last night we showed The Queen with Flawless Sabrina, which is a documentary from pre-Stonewall about drag pageants in New York. And it was a sold-out house of 250 people, and the star of the film was there. And these, I'm very. This is where Love is Strange comes in, because I'm in the middle of my life, and I see people passing, and I see people, not only, the past in terms of AIDS and what we lost there, but my parents and their generation. And I'm really, I'm not nostalgic, but I'm respectful and I'm attentive to this loss. And it's deep to me. And I feel, when I was shooting Love is Strange, I saw a couple of two men walking through the West Village who were clearly an old gay couple walking through the West Village. And I pulled out my phone and I shot a little video and I sent it to John Lithgow and Alfred Molina, because I was like, these are our guys. That's Ben and George. There they go. And it's important to me. I wouldn't just say it's moving or touching. It's important to me. I think it's also because you're in the middle of your life, you're aware that your own life will similarly pass. And I think the film contains a lot of that.
I went to Chelsea after the screening. I was starving, and I needed to go get my car after your screening, and I went to Chelsea, and it was this only restaurant that was sort of open, and I walked in and I sat down, and there were these two men in their late 60s, and they were sitting there in this very crowded, mostly male restaurant, and one of them turns to the waiter, this very hunky waiter, and was like, and the waiter brought them bloodies, and he said, "This has to be a virgin bloody. Dear God, he can't drink anymore." And they'd been together, for 30 years, Yeah. And I was like, that's it right there,
Well, what's interesting is last night I showed the film in San Francisco, and this woman in her 70s came up to me, and she said that the kid in the film, Joey, played by Charlie Tahan, she said, "He's so much like my grandson." And what was interesting to me is that, and what you hope for is that people can find their stories, whatever they might be, in a film like this. It's a multi-generational family drama. I mean, it's my own Magnificent Ambersons in some ways, even though it turns on very small things. And I think those are kinds of films which I've always responded to, which are both big and small at the same time. I wrote my senior thesis on Jacques Tati, his film Playtime, when I was in college. And I spent a lot of time watching Jacques Tati movies. And one of the things that I think is so impressive about his work is that you leave the theater looking at the world in a different way. You notice things when you've seen a Tati movie in terms of sound and image. And someone like Jim Cohen, totally different filmmaker, but similarly really changes the way I look at things. Scorsese can do that to me when I'm suddenly leaving a movie and everyone seems like they're in a Scorsese movie or in an Altman movie. And I think that's what you kind of hope for, is that the film is internalized and reconfigures how people are going to look at their own lives. I want to say I recently read a new screenplay, which I feel like I'm very lucky to be one of the first, and it's really so great and has stayed with me in this very, very deep way. And I think maybe because I'm here in Minneapolis in the Midwest, I'm thinking about it and the community. And I'm curious, maybe, you can tell us a little bit about where you are with the project. It has a huge amount of heart and intelligence, but it's really the craft that's involved. It's so well constructed and so subtle. I was really thrilled.
The craft is, for me, it's always my mind works sort of like a web. To me, it all happens in a web in my mind, and I think that it's a lost art to keep track of things. I recently read that Shirley Jackson walked up a hill and wrote the lottery in an hour and a half, and put her toddler in a playpen. And I think that I work very, very hard to keep a lot of detail in my mind in terms of structure. I try to hold these characters in my mind and their actions and their ideas in my mind. Because I feel in some ways I sort of owe it to the piece to hold the emotion of it. You know what I mean? I don't want to splay it all out there and say, oh, this is what happens there.
It benefits that we are both writer-directors. I think that there's something that is quite different about, because you can hold it in your mind, because actually the screenplay is just the beginning of a process of bringing it to life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I sometimes I can't imagine anyone taking it and directing it, because it's like shorthand. I rely on a lot of feedback. I love collaboration, and I'm just happy for the process. I'm just happy to be writing. I'm just happy when it's flowing. It's hard material, I don't know that it's ever going to see the what it will be realized in the way that it needs to be. But I hope for the best, And thank you for reading it. I appreciate it so very much. And you're currently writing 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. So have you and John Lithgow discussed what he'll wear at the Academy Awards brunch?
We just keep plugging along. I mean, I think so much of being a filmmaker is being a hustler. Really.
You're a pimp. You're the hardest working man in queer show business.
I'm pretty hardworking, and I'm shameless, and I'm egotistical, and I'm also, I think I have a sense of humor, and none of it's that important, and all of it's very important, and I think those are all kind of things that I think you try to get wisdom about how to have a certain balance, but at the same time, you just gotta nobody cares if you make your movie or not, to be honest, unless you've made them $100 million, and then you're part of a system, which of course we're capitalists. We live in a capitalist system. So of course, if you've made a lot of money, there is a pressure to do that again. There's a kind of relief when you haven't made a lot of money, because then you can just keep trying new things and seeing what you have the right to do. You have to raise that money, and that's something that I take very seriously. But there is also a freedom to not being that successful.
There's a freedom to also being kind of that old lady. You know what I mean? There is a freedom to that. There's not such a pressure. I mean, I love the idea of just being ridiculous.
I really like the idea of you as an old lady and me as a nice old Jewish man, and we're gonna keep going for a long time to having these conversations. It's kind of a joke, but it's not comical, because I think we connect to each other partially from those particular pasts. You're a nice Jewish girl. I'm a nice Jewish boy. We're soon going to be nice Jewish elderly.
Yeah, you're what Grammy Hall calls you're what Grammy Hall calls a real Jew, Ira.
Thank you, Grammy.
To quote another classic New York film.
Yes. Which one?
Annie Hall.
Oh.
We cut that one out, Nick. You didn't get it.
That's okay. I thought that was what you called your grandmother.
No, you're what Grammy Hall calls a real Jew. That's what Diane Keaton said.
I keep that, Nick, because I don't think I need to know every Woody Allen line, even though I'm a nice Jewish boy. I focused on husbands and wives. That was the period I was interested in.
Are we done? Is that it?
I got to go to dinner. Where am I? Dallas. I'm going to Dallas.
You're going to Dallas?
I'm going to Dallas.
Are there any old Jews who like movies in Dallas?
Wait a minute. I would not be going to any town where they're not old Jews, because those are the only people who, as a community, support art house cinema across the country.
Right.
I'm told that they do. I'm always going to a city where right next to the theater is a bagel shop.
That's right. That's right. It's so funny. Everybody's asking me about my new film, and everybody's like, why would we make this? And I'm like, old Jews? That's why. Old Jews. And they're like, they won't watch this. And I was like, yeah, they will. Yeah, they will. Yeah, they will.
Numbers on that comedy, Ida,
Yeah.
A really not the easiest film, which has made $4 million in the box office in America. So
it has?
Yes.
Wow.
There you go.
Ida has made $4 million.
Let's okay. Now you can take this as a pause, but I'm going to go to Box Office Mojo.
Okay, it hasn't made $4 million. Ida has made $4 million. I doubt it.
Very close. Who's going to be quicker? $3,593,867.
Dear Lord.
There you go. God bless the Jews.
God bless the Jews.
This is Nick Dawson from Talkhouse Film, and you've been listening to Stacie Passon in conversation with Ira Sachs on the Talkhouse Film podcast. For more filmmakers talking film and TV, visit film.thetalkhouse.com. Subscribe to Talkhouse Film and Talkhouse Music Podcast on iTunes, where you can find all our previous episodes. And while you're there, please rate and review if you can. Until next time, goodbye.
What did he say? Talkhouse what? Podcast?
What did he say? What is he talking about? What is he saying?
Podcast is hard. You go, Stacie. I'll follow you.
Hi, it's Stacie Passon, and you're listening to Ira Sachs and Stacie Passon on the Talkhouse podcast. Yeah.
There you go.